Is the background okay? Not too bright and all that, no?
No, no, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we can begin. So,
Right.
so welcome, Raghu, and thank you so much for joining this podcast
Thank you.
from
Thank you.
Kotagiri, uh,
Yes.
a very beautiful place down South India. And good to have you here, Raghu. So, today's conversation, I thought we would do around spiral dynamics and an Indic
Okay.
approach to it, and
Hmm.
also the larger integral theory and how do we look at it from our Indic lenses. That was the broad intent. And since you've done work on this for a while now, I think in India, one of the earliest people I saw writing on this was your work. Of course, Sri Aurobindo has been there, but I'm saying in
Hmm.
contemporary spaces. So let me begin with Raghu. When did you encounter spiral dynamics, and what was your response when you first encountered it? Did it resonate? Did it raise some questions? When was this? How did it all begin? Getting to know all this.
See, it began, must be about 20, 25 years back, at least. Yeah. I'm not sure about the dates. I had to run a program on values and leadership for the Murugappa group. I'd been working with them for a while on the leadership thing. And then there was a point of time when the family management was handing over to professional management, at which point of time they wanted to do a fairly large program where all the people who had been through the various leadership programs till then, yeah, that I was part of designing and had conducted some of the parts of it, we came together on what would be the values that they have to internalize. So I invited Ashok to work with me, and Venki Mutaya, I don't know what is, yeah, Venki, Venki Mutaya. That's how we call him, no? One of the family members. He was anchoring it from the family side. Yeah. So when we had a dialogue, what Ashok did was he said, let's use this old framework that he had worked on when he was in ASCII, which was Clay Graves' framework of values. So we went through that and we started working with it. Right? It was very meaningful for two reasons. One, it is not a prescriptive framework. And secondly, it allows for a lot of self-reflection. At least the way Ashok and I were working with it, it allows for a lot of self-reflection. And then I actually encouraged Ashok to keep, to see how we can work with it. Then Ashok went on to create an Indic version, his understanding of it, because while there are some similarities, there are also a lot of differences in the way we look at life, we look at the world, and the way the Western theories in general look at the whole thing. Right? Ours is much more open. It's not very linear. Right? Like one of the articles of faith that Ashok and I and all of us hold is that life is a work in progress. Right? The other is that it is not as though there is this level and this level and this level, but there is a pattern that is possible inside each of us, where there's a different kind of emphasis on different kind of value types. Right? And the word values itself is not something we are very happy with, because it's very, it's like a noun. We think there's a valuing process.
Okay.
Right? And at different times, under different conditions, one would respond differently. So I'm really like a musical chord, right? And when I'm in the world, I'm actually playing out some kind of a combination of these notes, emphasizing something, not emphasizing something, right? So it's a much more, in our minds, a much more holistic way of looking at the human being.
So I think,
Yeah,
yeah, these differences,
right.
sure.
And while working with this, Ashok and I have taken slightly different routes. Ashok has gone more and more into defining the values, defining the universes, and so on. And while working with him, I have been more fascinated with the roles that each of these universes will uh, will nurture, right? Because not because I differ with him in any way, but talking about the roles is a little more tangible than talking about the universes. Right. For example, what is referred to, I don't remember the colors in the spiral dynamics, but what we refer to as ecological. Right. There's a level that we refer to as ecological. Right. Now that the possibility of somebody like a Nakula, right, who has strong Nakula propensities, will flower when there is a the ecological processes of living and valuing and so on are predominant, then the Nakula type of role will,
Is thrive.
will will come alive, right? We have another universe which we call arena, which I think is red in the spiral dynamics. Yeah, the Bhima type of energy will come through. Right now, it doesn't mean that only Bhima will come alive. Right. So if I look at the Pandava archetypes, there's a certain kind of courage and arousal and competitiveness and so on. Each of the five will show it in different ways.
Okay.
But it's predominantly the Bhima type of propensity that is awakened. Yeah, in that. So we've looked at it in these terms.
Sure. So Raghu, just to complete this, there was also clockwork, which I think is blue, and then there was network, which is orange, and ecological, I think, is the green, and then there is an integral.
Green, holonic,
Integral is
what
the
we call
holonic. Yeah,
holonic,
yeah, yeah. So how would you
and
place the Pandavas in each of these then? Blue or clockwork would be more Yudhishthir then.
Yudhishthira types, yes.
Uh,
Sahadeva would be the network,
or the orange value people.
orange types, yeah.
And then
Yeah,
Arjun would be holonic or Krishna would be holonic.
Arjuna would be holonic.
Being able to
Yeah,
move.
Krishna is not really an archetypal. I mean, he's not a human prototype. No, he's not a human archetype.
Right, right.
So we don't bring him in unnecessarily.
Sure. Okay. Great. So you were able to convert these at the level of roles and see what.
I work a little more emphasizing this. Ashok could emphasize the value thing a little more, kind of a thing.
And the universes of belonging and roles and boundaries and
Hmm.
belonging and protection.
So we've
Yeah.
even defined it very differently.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we've defined the universes. Like the first universe is the universe of belonging and what is that? Yeah, I'm forgetting.
Belonging and protection, role and boundaries.
Belonging, yeah, UBP, belonging and protection. The universe of URB is roles and boundaries. That is clockwork, and then there is the universe of
There's a duality and simultaneity
duality
universe.
and simultaneously is holonic, right? And then
Is there some universe on achievement also,
UBP,
or
yeah.
which would be network, I guess?
Purpose and achievement is network, which is your orange, right? Why am I forgetting the arena? Arena is the universe of strength and I'll just look it up. Yeah.
No problems. But so yeah, I'll probably also add links to the presentations that Ashok's given on these things also to map the universes.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you have chosen to consciously, therefore, not work on universes, but roles and propensities that get invoked,
Not work on. I'm emphasizing more of
emphasizing more
this.
on those
Yeah. Yeah.
than those. So, Raghu, then I think coming from there into just seeing at a cultural level, right? Because again, Western integral theory tends to also judge cultures based on value means. To say that sort of tribal cultures are purple, magenta, or certain cultures in the Middle East are red, or religious cultures are kind of blue, and modern post enlightenment are orange. Like they have this layering, right?
Yeah. And they'll always have the layering to make it sound as though they are the most advanced. No?
Right, absolutely. So,
So you have to look at it carefully. See, the way we would look at it is we would say there's a center of gravity in different cultures, right? Which means that there would be a whole range and there would be pockets of different kinds of combinations even within that. So giving a monolith kind of an idea is simplifying human beings to a level that doesn't really make sense.
but even in center of
Right?
gravity, Raghu, they'll do the same, right? In the sense, place their center of gravity at say holonic or ecological,
Yes,
and other
yes, they would.
cultures.
Yes, they would. So we have to look at it critically. Na?
Yeah, yeah.
See, for example, the US, which goes around bombing the rest of the world at the drop of a hat and says that my greatness and my security is more important than everybody else's, comes through as red.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As red as it can get. Yeah. Very predatory with everybody else. Yeah. So what does it mean when Ken Wilber or somebody says that we have a percentage of people in
Yeah, at
whatever
those
coral
levels. Yeah, yeah.
at those levels more than some other place or
Yeah,
this or
yeah.
that? I just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
Right. So there's also the lens through which it's being looked at.
Sure.
Yeah. Like for example, I don't personally consider Western civilizations a great success. Yeah. Because while at one level, they've got great wealth and they've invested their wealth in various kinds of knowledge creation and so on and so forth, that wealth has been got at the price of genocides, at the price of cultural appropriation, all that, which is phenomenally violent. Right. So what does success mean? What does development mean?
Sure.
Yeah. So uh, you know uh, how do these so-called ecologically minded people countenance this kind of civilizational processes?
Right.
And what do they do? So right, so every culture, I have a feeling, like any human being, when you look at yourself, you probably look at yourself in one way which is more self-congratulatory than it needs to be. And if I look at you and if I look at another perspective, I might see some things that you're not conscious of. Yeah, as
True.
elementary as a Johari window types.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I hear you, Raghu. So that's nice to know. So maybe good to then turn our gaze to our culture, because that's what I feel is worth
No,
being
I think
preoccupied.
before we turn our gaze to our culture, I think we have to also look critically
Hmm.
at the spiral dynamics and all of this itself.
The process itself, or the theory
No,
framework
what
itself.
what is the theory? How these frameworks come to be created? Because when you're presenting it to me, you're placing it this is a Western theory kind of a
Yeah,
thing. That's
yeah,
how you started.
yeah, yeah.
Now, if you look at it carefully, now, one of the key people in this whole theoretical formulation is a person called Jean Gebser. Now, he came to India just after the World War, right? He was a thinker, whatever. He came to India because he was depressed, severely depressed about the West, which any thinking human being would be after the World War, right? And he encounters Aurobindo, and his understanding of Aurobindo's philosophy and so on is what gives him the sense of hope. And he then talks about the whole World War, the entire set of events in terms that are very similar to Aurobindo, where Aurobindo talks about the coming of the supermind, the shifts that are happening at a very, very deep spiritual level, and that these are the consequences of very deep shifts that are happening. So he starts talking in evolutionary terms, which is very similar to Aurobindo, right? And he is the influence for many of these people, right? Now, when Clay Graves, who is the more direct uh, influencer of spiral dynamics, when he started fundamentally to say, how do we bring in a more unified sense of understanding into the whole field of psychology, which is extremely diverse and bits and pieces of so many things. Now, it is impossible for a person who is into psychology at that depth that he was in, not to have read Jung, not to have read Assagioli, and several people who have directly dipped into Sankhya, yoga, Buddhist thought, and so on. Jung, for example, has written commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, right? And as a person who knows Yoga Sutra, I wouldn't recommend his commentary as a very great commentary because, right, but interesting, because he brings in some of his concepts and things like that. Yeah. And his own theories are very deeply shaped by his study of the Upanishads. He has commented about the chakra theory and so on, right? And so there has been a huge influence of Indian thought through Germany, through many of these people. Like another very, very important person around that time is Joseph Campbell, right? And Joseph Campbell, him and his teacher, Schmidt, Wilhelm Schmidt, if I remember right, are all very highly influenced by Hindu thought, by Buddhist thought, and so on, right? So that's the context in which this whole process is happening. Yeah, the other person who is a very good friend of Clare Graves is who's the person who worked on the hierarchy of need? No, hierarchy of needs. Maslow. Abraham Maslow was very influenced by Joseph Campbell. He was very influenced by Alan Watts, and so on. He actually spent a couple of years in the Big Sur, right? And the Big Sur was a center in America of looking at how Eastern thought and Western thought can dialogue with each other. Yeah. So the context in which this theory has grown is already rich with a huge amount of East-West dialogue. Yeah. And also the way Clay Graves went about it is also very, very interesting. Yeah. He first starts off by asking people to write an essay on what is a mature human being, or who is a mature human being, right? To his graduate class students and things like this. So this is a research he's done over many years. So he works with all these essays that people write. And he first divided it into two sets of statements of what is maturity. So one set of statements have to do with things like saying people who can express, who can go and get what they want, right? A certain use of power are mature human beings. And there's another set of statements that talk about control of impulses, yeah, doing the right thing, yeah, being much more balanced within. These are the kinds of two sets of statements. And then he studies it further and he finds that people who come from different backgrounds, right, tend to say that one type of people are more mature than the other. For example, people who come from difficult inner city backgrounds, where if you have to survive, you have to be powerful. You have to be able to defend yourself. You have to be able to fight for what you want, right? Are all people who say that maturity is strength, let's say. And then he found that people with very strongly religious backgrounds would say the other. So he then starts to work for the first time very explicitly in the West about the social context in which a person is living and the response to that context as some kind of a dynamic. Yeah. Now, this, in one sense, would be fairly close to the Indian idea, which says that self doesn't exist as it is, but me as a self comes into manifestation in uh, in simultaneity with the context that I'm in. Okay, so self is not a noun, right? While the West tends to treat it as a noun, we don't treat self as a noun. It's a constantly emerging phenomenon. And there are certain patterns through which we manifest ourselves and emerge, and these patterns tend to get frozen. If the pattern tends to get frozen, we also say that this person will experience more and more dukkha. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then Clare Graves goes on to examine this further, and he said there are two sets in this express now, be strong, get what you want. One is express now for benefits now. Okay. The other one is says express, but express strategically. Right? Look at today, look at tomorrow, plan, strategize, and get. And the control kind of thing also has two. One of which says control yourself now for benefits later, which is like benefits in the heaven, literally. And the other group that says you modulate your behavior and be inclusive and sharing and so on, because that there are benefits in it now. There's a certain human contextual benefit now. So this is the way he goes on to build his theory, which is very, very interesting. Right. After which he adds many things to it. But this origin of the way that Clare Graves worked out the theory, I think is important to keep in mind. Because here there is a certain observational thing which I think we can compare with some of the ways in which the Indian theories have grown, because Indian theories are all observational theories that have grown over a long period of time. Right. So what do we talk about here? We talk about the chakras. Right. Unfortunately, much of the current literature on chakras is heavily influenced by Jungian work and work by Jungians. So I think it's kind of it's very colored. But if you go back to Indian dance, you get a much more pragmatic, much more, in a sense, pure idea of what these movements mean. Right. So there is there are 7 steps in this movement, and in these 7 steps, there are very clearly articulated ideas of self and the other and the world and so on. And these are largely in the context of the Radha Krishna or a devotee of Shiva, how they grow.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, it's very beautifully worked out.
mm,
So there are some similarities at some level,
mm, mm.
right? But there are all of these differences also.
Sure, sure. And some of this definitely predates a lot of the modern thinking because
By
uh,
hundreds of years,
by
no?
thousands, yeah, by several uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
centuries
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Like the Shaivite, the Kashmiri Shaivite tradition has a lot of this.
Mm, mm,
The Mahabharata Pandavas themselves
mm.
are
Represent.
clearly, yeah, are clearly categorized or whatever. The form that those five people are given clearly has to do with different aspects of the self, different parts of the self that can be valued.
Mm, mm.
Yeah,
Sure.
and so on. So this idea is very prevalent in Indian thought from way back.
Right.
It's interesting that Clay Graves has come upon it in a certain way with some empirical study. For example, if you compare what Clay Graves has to say now about the mature person, Krishnamacharya, my teacher, was very clear. He said that a mature person in the yogic context is somebody who can experience the Navarasas
Mm, mm, mm.
while being constantly anchored in Shantam.
Mm, mm, mm.
Right now, this would be whatever choral or something in there
Yeah,
in Western
yeah,
terms.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
very
yeah,
complete, very beautiful,
yeah,
very
yeah.
joyous understanding of a human being.
Right, right,
So
right.
ideas like this have been around for a long time.
Yeah. And like many other things, they've been packaged and put into the world by the
No,
West as the
there have
West.
been some independent discovery also. Like for example, Jung, while he takes a lot from here, he also does independent work, no, of
Okay,
examining. So it's not just taken and repackaged, but there is a definite influence.
okay, okay.
At the same time, there are definite distinctions and differences.
Hmm. Like you said, the distinction around how self is seen or how value
Yes,
versus valuing as a process
correct,
and patterns
correct,
rather than levels.
correct.
So some of
The
those
other, the
differences.
other, I think, very important distinction, Abhishek, is it's fairly explicitly stated that Western psychology is doing third-person research.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
So I, as a psychologist, I'm not doing any introspection.
Right.
Yeah, introspection was tried and set aside in Western psychology. It's relegated to philosophy. Even there is not taken very seriously, right? So it's more to describe you, to describe the other, and to describe something like that outside. Whereas yoga, which is Indian psychology fundamentally, is all about introspection. So when I look at, let's say, these 7 ways of being that are described in Indian dance, they are meant for me to look at myself and understand where I'm stuck and what is happening,
Hmm, hmm.
right? And my own movements within, and how appropriately can I deploy myself. Am I getting stuck? Am I seated in Shantam when I'm experiencing the
Hmm.
world? Or is my center of gravity already shifted? Right. So if my center of gravity is shifted, let's say to Raudram, which is arousal, right? Chances are that my behavior will tend to be like Bhima, very impulsive, very action oriented, right? And so on. So these ideas are inherent in much of Indian thought and writing,
Hmm. Great.
right? Including, I mean, there's a Buddhist parallel to this, no?
Okay.
The realm of the hungry ghost, the realm of the human being, whatever. They've got their own, which is very close to the understanding of the chakras.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think Ken Wilber honestly also says that he looked for patterns across several things and then kind of abstracted them to
Yeah,
make that
he's
integral.
very explicit about it in his early writing, his indebtedness to Aurobindo,
Hmm, hmm.
and so on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, just wanted to bring this, Raghu, to how do we look at our own culture and currently which patterns are manifesting? How does one uh, work on a culture in a way that its patterns are healthier? Also, about the design of our culture, which seems to have its own wisdom deeply embedded into it, is how I was seeing some of how our wisdom traditions have codified and made it accessible to people. So, just from this whole lens of patterns and this whole lens of spiral dynamics, if I may put it, how would you look at our culture right now? Is it that certain tendencies are getting amplified, or how? What would be Indic way to looking at Indic culture, but keeping spiral dynamics in a little bit of a side view mirror?
Let's keep Hume as a side view mirror.
Okay, okay, the universes. Okay, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Um, See, my own feeling is that um, for 2 3 reasons. Now, one, we are a river valley civilization, and therefore our civilizations have grown in great deal of abundance.
Hmm.
We are forest civilizations, right? So unlike a Christ, when he goes into retreat, he goes into a desert, and all Western mythologies about people going into deep inner reflection and so on, the analogy is always going into a desert.
Hmm. Hmm.
As in the Indian mythologies, going into a period of self-reflection is always going into the forest. It's a vanavasa,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So symbolically, it's a culture that is fundamentally in an extremely rich place, right? And therefore, if you look at many of the basic values that we articulate, they're highly ecological. Yeah, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Atiti Devo Bhava,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? These are all philosophies of or ways of being which accept the other in ways that are sharing, caring, friendly, offering, and so on, right? So this culture has had to experience people who came out of deserts, right? The entire European culture is anchored in cold deserts, most of it, except the Mediterranean, right? And the Islamic cultures are anchored in hot deserts, right? So the center of gravity of a desert space, which is fundamentally a scarcity space, will have to emphasize, like the study of Claire Graves, no? Saying you have to be strong, you have to go there and grab what you want, you have to take that and create wealth for yourself. Whereas in a place where there is plenty,
Hmm.
what is the meaning of creating wealth for myself and hoarding?
Hmm. What
It'll
is the
only
need?
rot.
Yeah, yeah,
It'll
yeah,
only rot.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So I might as well have fresh stuff which is growing all the while. Yeah.
Hmm.
So the whole context has to be understood in a slightly more geographical, historical way, is my way of looking at it.
Sure.
Right. So it has been largely ecological. So if you go back into the history of how the Parsis came here, it's a story of an ecological culture.
Hmm.
You give them space and you say, okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, see how to add sweetness to this land. Beautiful,
Hmm.
right? I'm quite certain if you went to the to any Western context, you'll be first treated as an alien. You go and land in America, the first thing you'll hear is aliens here and somebody else here,
Hmm.
right? I'm quite certain we would say guests here and
Hmm. Hmm.
people from our land out here, right? The whole orientation of how you look at the other, how you look at resources is very, very different because of this, right? The Native American cultures are very much like Indian. Nah? They said, come, there's plenty, and things like that. But the people who came didn't have the mind of sharing. So the center of gravity of Western cultures is definitely red, and which it would be, right? Any desert culture, they would have a very strong red and purple, if you ask me. There has to be great in-group cohesion and out-group violence and out-group aggression for acquiring things. Yeah, so in my understanding, we are today acting in envy of this red power, right? And because of penury, where we've been reduced to penury from a state of fair richness, our ecological context has become more and more conservative and is starting to look like purple. Right. So the same mind which said, okay, if you're having a different way of looking at the world, come and live here. Right. Let's work out how you and I are going to work together, because the resources are shared and so on. So there is a respect for the commons, there's a respect for whom you are, there's a respect for who I am, and a lot of interface laws. So if you look at Indian conduct, the Yoga Sutra doesn't describe how you must behave in that sense. It says what are the interface rules. Ahimsa is an interface rule. Satyam is the way I speak to you, and so on. They're all interface rules. Right. So you have cultures today, you have cultures in Gujarat, which have retained their African roots, which have found ways of interacting with the people around. Right. Now, when there is abundance, when you're a rich nation, this is a beautiful way to be, because it allows diversity. Yeah, it allows a lot of working together when you need to, but you go back to your own and you pursue your own. Right? You find this in discourses with the Buddha. Yeah, where a group of people go to him and say, we have two preceptors, and they have strong issues and they keep on debating about matters of the doctrine. What do you have to say? So he says, what is X saying? What is Y saying? He listens to it and says, let me think about it. I'm not too sure. And then he says, those of you who feel that X is making sense, go and practice that way. People who feel that Y is the right thing, practice that way. Right? Come back to me after a year and let's see what has happened, and then we'll see how to take a decision.
Okay.
Right? To me, this is an acme of a way of thinking, which I guess in spiral dynamics would be called yellow or some other color, not coral or some color like that, which is extremely wise, which is saying let's respect differences, let's respect divergences, let's go and experiment. He doesn't say I know. He says let's experiment and find out. Yeah, so these have been very strong, and you'll find this in many aspects. Nah?
Sure.
Now, it started getting more and more conservative because of various forces, challenges from outside, which we had to deal with. And it's very clear we haven't known how to deal with forces which are very red. Right? We don't know how to really defend our ways. Right? Our in-group cohesion is not as strong, which I think is great. So the ways in which we have looked at ourselves, right, have not necessitated this kind of in-group cohesion, ensuring uniformity. You know, many of the clockwork blue, excessive blue, which blue inward and red outward. See, they're yeah, if I look at the Western civilizational movement, it's moved from high purple red to blue red, right? And then in the last 200-300 years, there's a shift towards orange or whatever, and there's a certain movement this way. But the core of blue red defines, let's say, the whole American flag is blue red, man. And there, you look at what is happening to them. Yeah, they're still talking about certain biblical things as though the biblical truths are absolutely right. And huge percentages of their population are talking about these kind of things, right? So there's a small population there which has moved into experimentation and so on. But what do they use the experimentation for? They use the experimentation to create nuclear bombs.
Or addictive technology.
Right. So the center of gravity of that whole thought, if you can call it civilizational thought, is towards blue-red. Right. Whereas in India, there's a huge amount of allowing diversity to happen. All of that still in the mind. I'm sure most people who have very strong Hindu Buddhist lineages or very strong Hindu Buddhist tradition would not look at this kind of monolithic cohesive idea of the religion as a meaningful direction to go to. And yet Abrahamic religions are very monolithic. So they're very strongly blue-red. Yeah. Whereas Indian civilization's center of gravity, I think, is green-yellow. We value spirituality. We still value spirituality. But we don't know how to deal with on the blue-red combination that is taking over the world, the scarcity mindset that is taking over the world.
Right.
Yeah. China, on the other side, is also very clearly blue-red. Yeah. While China works on the currency of power, and very simplistically, America works on the currency of money, their structures are the same, man. All this talk about democracy is not, I mean, it's slightly dicey because it's so manipulated. Consent is manipulated, right? So it seems as though it is not coercive, but it's coercive at a very deep level through advertising, through the use of propaganda. In a country like China, it's much more explicit. The use of coercion to determine choices is a little more, much more explicit. But what is the difference actually? They're fundamentally blue-red.
Hear you. And for us, like you said, it's more a green-yellow civilization that now, in coping with a world which is red-blue, is struggling
It's going
finding
all
its
over the
questions.
place. Yeah, it's struggling. It's going all over the place. It's becoming purple. It's becoming red. It really is. Yeah, it's lost its center of gravity.
Right.
Yeah, so we are coping with a current which doesn't have a cohesive, coherent center. It has a memory which it sometimes admires, sometimes holds in hate, which is of a very high order of civilizational base. Yeah, even a controversial historian like Samuelson or whoever who's written about the clash of civilizations has a similar view.
In terms of us having some cultural memory of the times?
No, of Indian subcontinent having had values that are high civilization, having to deal with the much more violent forms of civilization.
Right. So I guess the message is to evoke the cultural memories and use those to uplift ourselves through the chaos that's unfolding, I guess, in the world. So any final thoughts on this?
And if we can go back in a time machine to tell Prithviraj Chauhan, buddy, when you fight and you win, it's okay to say, go back and come once. For the second time, you act decisively and put an end
to the
to, yeah.
to the
So,
enemies.
yeah, going forward, na, my conviction is that, and the issue is not just with India, Abhishek, it is with all peoples who've had polytheistic understanding of life. Yeah. Unfortunately, many of these civilizations are very, very weak today. I don't think there's that much of a difference between the Native American ways of looking at the world. I think they would also have been very strongly ecological, fundamentally, right? With shades of other things in them. Yeah. And like this, I'm sure there are, like, the whole idea of Gaia is there in many of the American Indian thought. Yeah. So I'm not saying that this is exclusively Indian, but India is one of the few countries, civilizational continuities, which is still there. So we can talk about this continuity.
Right.
And I think going forward, unless the idea of dharma, which is the underlying, to me, the underlying form of, let's say, a blue value in a green yellow. If you look at the blue value from a green yellow location, it is dharma. It's dharma.
Okay.
Right? Which is fundamentally, what is the question dharma is asking? It's repeated in the Mahabharata over and over again. What choices are you making in your action that sustain life, that allow you to flower, that allow others to flower around you, that nurtures the earth? This is the question that comes up over and over again. This is not a blue question. This is a green yellow
question said in a
choral question. Right? I think we have to return as human beings. This has to be the central question. If it is not, I don't see a future for humanity. Right? I mean, it should be obvious to people that acquisitiveness and the kind of you versus me kind of stuff that is outmoded, man. This is, it's not even Iron Age. Right? And yet today, world politics is going back to some of these extremely, nationalism is what? It is just glorified purple.
Right.
Yeah, it's there all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire Trump episode is a outpouring of
a lot of purple and red.
Of purple and red. Yeah, what's happening in Turkey? Yeah, what's happening in Russia? What's happening in China? Yeah, none of them are running on a dharmic question, and India is also moving that way. It's not as though we are asking terribly dharmic questions. And if if dharma is not the ground of choice making, and if acquisitiveness, which is fundamentally red, is the center of gravity of choice making, the earth is going to be desertified. Yeah.
Right.
The fires in Amazon will never be put out.
Yes. Yeah, so the hope is that we'll have leaders and people who are more and more dharmic, I think, going ahead, and hopefully these words that you have and messages and all people, the work of people like you shall percolate into the culture and into consciousness. So I think with that intent, thank you so much.
That's a good intent. That's a
yes.
good intent, Abhishek.
Yes, and thank you so much, Raghu, for your time.
Yeah.
And we shall
Thank
continue many
you.
of these conversations. Thank you
Sure.
so much.
Thank you. Bye.